Our meditation is led by David Bryant.
Good morning. For the meditation this morning, I'd like you to go to that place just before you wake up in the morning. You're lying in bed, you're not quite awake, you're not quite asleep. And find that sort of bardo state where you're waiting for the breezes to blow. And just take this poem that I'm going to read and let it move you and memorize this poem so that when you wake up in the morning you can also come to this place. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. The breezes at dawn have secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. That door is round and open. Please, don't go back to sleep. Thank you.
Our speaker this morning is Bob Miller. He says there are many events and persons commonly defined as either part of mythology or of religion, which are also considered real or historical. And he's going to help us sort all that out. He earned a BA and MA degrees from University of Michigan, then joined the U.S. Coast Guard, attended later Columbia University, pursuing but not acquiring his PhD, then joined an international company based in New York. Retiring, he realized his real self by joining archaeological digs in various classical Mediterranean sites. And he and his wife have lived here for about 18 years. Let's welcome Bob Miller.
Okay, you can all hear me. When I first started working on this subject, I thought it would be a very good idea, first of all, to define, more or less accurately, all three of the words: mythology, religion, and reality. Well, that's easier said than done, it turns out. Reality, well, that's not too hard. Things are either real or they aren't. They are recorded and witnessed, or they aren't, mostly. to correctly define the other two, mythology and religious belief, I figured I'd go to the fountainhead of all knowledge, Google. Google sent me to that other know-it-all source, Wikipedia. And here's what Wikipedia said. Religion, definition. Religion is a belief concerning the supernatural, sacred, or divine, and the moral codes, practices, values, and institutions associated with such belief. Mythology usually refers to either a system of myth or a study of myth. Briefly, we can say that a myth gives a religious explanation for something, how the world or a particular custom began. There is usually no attempt to fix the myth into a coherent chronology related to the present day, although myths and a circle of myths may have their own internal chronology. Well, being a well-trained historian, I had to verify the information with other sources. So I next went to an old but pretty big copy of Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, which I happened to find on my homemade bookshelf. I'm rather proud that I built that. So Webster's New Collegiate gives me these definitions. Mythology, a body of myth, especially dealing with gods, demigods, and legendary heroes of a particular people, and usually involving supernatural elements. Religion, the service and worship of God or gods or the supernatural. Also a commitment or devotion to a religious faith or observance. Well, it's still a little bit fuzzy, so let's go to the final definitive authority on definitions, the OED, Oxford English Dictionary. The OED says, myth, a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. Religion, the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. And that makes sense. It derives from the Latin word religio, which means an obligation. Well, now that we've defined all those things, I'm still faced with a common and horrible dilemma. I thought what I'd do, I'd come in here and say, well, folks, there's the difference between mythology, religion, and reality. Any questions? I don't think so. There's lots of questions. So I'm actually going to have to natter on about this for maybe half an hour. If I wanted to explore it thoroughly, we'd be here until halftime of the next football game. So let's start with real old-time religion, polytheism. We'll start with the father of the gods, Zeus. Now, we really have no evidence for his existence. Therefore, we're right to deny it. Or are we? I mean, there's no evidence of his existence today. There's no reports of avenging thunderbolts being thrown except during the rainy season. No weird seductions in the form of a swan or a bull, or, can you believe this, a shower of gold? But back in his day, say around 700 to 400 BCE, there must have been considerable evidence, at least enough to make questioning his reality a heresy, punishable by banishment or death. And that's from a pretty advanced civilization. Even as this civilization, the Greek civilization, developed the tools of historiography and philosophy, Zeus's reality was not widely questioned. Sure, some philosophers and poets showed the gods behaving badly, or what they really meant behaving like human beings. But they never denied their existence. What was the basis of this belief? Was it mythology, religion, or reality? One historian puts it, quote, the greatest evidence for the existence of gods is that piety works. The converse is that impiety leads to disaster. Well, we 21st century people, we savants, may scoff at all that. But surely the ancients did not live in the same kind of world we do. Certainly not the worlds in their heads and in their hearts. Look, all the statues and other representations of Zeus show him as an elderly god with a beard. And thus we all know, and we always have known since ancient times, that men with beards are totally smarter, kinder, and more powerful than ordinary mortals. And I think there are quite a few of you who believe that. In any case, beard definitions are not sufficient to solve this conundrum. So let me take a look at some examples of things that are either religion or mythology or maybe reality. A prime example is the Trojan War. The cause of the war, according to mythology, was sexual. Paris, the Prince of Troy, was promised by the goddess Aphrodite, the most beautiful woman in the world, known as Helen of Troy. Rather inconveniently for Paris, and somewhat carelessly for Aphrodite, Helen was already married. She was married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. But that seemed only a minor annoyance to Paris, so he carried off Helen to Troy. Menelaus, understandably upset, called his brother Agamemnon, who was the chief king of the Greek city-states, and they gathered their troops and laid siege to Troy for 10 long years. Now, we don't really hear much about Menelaus during the siege, perhaps because he became something of a bore. He was always wandering around the camp, muttering, "She's not Helen of Troy, damn it. I never agreed to the divorce. She's Helen of Sparta." The war finally ended when the Greeks built a big wooden horse, hid some soldiers inside of it, and when the Trojans rolled it inside the city walls, that night the Greeks and the horse opened the gates, and the whole Greek army poured in and destroyed the city. And that's where the old saying comes from: beware of the Greeks getting wooden horses. Always remember. Well, is the whole event mythology or religion or reality? Well, actually, I think it's a bit of all three. To the ancients, Greek, Roman, Etruscan, Macedonian, it was part and parcel of their religious beliefs. To us, it's a mythological event. But wait, archaeology, starting with the crude work of Heinrich Schliemann, shows that there was a city, in fact, many cities, one on top of the other at the site described by Homer as Ilium, or Troy. Schliemann found gold jewelry and other precious artifacts at that site, which he called the treasure of Priam, king of Troy. Well, at least he claimed he found it. There was some thought that he bought it in a Turkish market and planted it there. Whatever. Unfortunately, he did get his chronology all wrong, and the city where he found it, which is designated as Troy III, predated the time of the Trojan War by 500 to 600 years. The city, now known to archaeology as Troy VI-B, fits chronologically with the presumed date of the war, around 1153 BCE. And it does show evidence of violent destruction and burning. It also fits in with the period of what is called the Great Catastrophe, which occurred from around 1200 to around 1130 BCE, when over 40 of the city-states of the Eastern Mediterranean area and empires were violently destroyed, some very close to the site of Troy. So here we have an event that can easily fit all three categories: myth, religion, and reality. Now let's take a look at some other examples. Where do they fit? Well, there's an old legend about Theseus and the Minotaur. Theseus was the prince of Athens and was chosen to be one of the young men annually sent to Crete to the court of King Minos to be sacrificed to the half-bull, half-man called the Minotaur. They're now known as defensive linemen in the National Football League. It's a long story, but he managed to slay the Minotaur and escape back to Athens. To us, myth. To the Athenians, religious belief, but maybe in some respects, reality. Well, why is that? Well, when Sir Arthur Evans excavated at Knossos in Crete at the turn of the 20th century, the site of a large, complex palatial building He uncovered wall paintings of young men grabbing bulls' horns and trying to leap over them. He also found a number of bull symbols in prominent locations. So perhaps this reflected an actual religious rite involving young men taking high risks leaping over bulls. Ergo, a touch of reality here as well. Here's another example from personal experience. When I was on a dig on Cyprus at ancient Idalium, in the modern Italia, right near the dig site was the site of the meeting and sexual encounter between Venus and Adonis, probably entirely mythical. I mean, why would an experienced, utterly desirable woman and a goddess to boot fall madly in love with a very young man? I mean, a handsome young man, so it's possible. But here's an example of more crossover, again a personal experience on Cyprus. Very near, but a few miles inland from the seaside area where Aphrodite or Venus was born, and you can check that out, the Sandro Botticelli painting, I think it's in the Uffizi Gallery. There is a shrine dating back about 5,000 years to at least 3000 BCE. It's a shrine to a female deity, usually referred to as the Magna Mater, the Great Mother Goddess. The object of devotion is represented by a large, human-sized, black stone in the shape of a pregnant woman, about 8 months into it. For 3 millennia in the ancient world, newly married women came here to pray to the Magna Mater for fertility, the ability to bear children. The stone is actually still there. It's worn down quite a bit, but it's still there. It's still recognizable. But instead of being in a temple to the goddess Aphrodite or Venus, it's enclosed in a Christian church to Mary. And guess what? Newly married Cypriot women still come there to pray to whoever, maybe Mary, for fertility. Although her having virgin birth doesn't seem to fit. I don't know how well it works, but it's still going on. In fact, what the women do is they come there with their bridal veil, and usually they're coming down from the hills of Troodos Mountains, and their veils are made out of wool, and they unwind the veil and wrap it around the church as a gift to the Magna Mater. So there's something real happening there. Another example is again personal. Last June, I think it was, we were in a place called Paestum in Italy, just south of Salerno, south of Naples. And there are 3 beautiful, beautiful Greek temples there. The place was settled by the Greeks long before the Romans. It was called Poseidonia. And the temples are to Hera, to Poseidon, and to Aphrodite. And they're absolutely magnificent. They've been very, very well restored. When I was there the first time 12 years ago, they were working on it. And if you're ever in that area, you should go there. It's wonderful. The temple to Hera is also supposed to be a fertility place where couples would go at night and copulate under the roof of the temple in order to bear children. Well, my wife and I decided that was not probably a good idea since we had 6. In fact, we were looking for the anti-fertility temple. Now, for a change in emphasis, we'll consider events that are primarily religious in nature and see whether they are either or also mythological and or real. I'll start with Moses and his doings. They're seminal to the formation of the monotheistic religions now dominant in the Western world. Polytheism, the worship of numerous gods, was very common in the West for untold millennia until we discovered economics and decided to downsize the deities. Moses, by the way, is a common Egyptian name. It means is born, and is carried by many pharaohs prior to and after the time of Moses, such as Thutmose, born of the god Thoth, and Ramesses, born of the god Ra. Well, he was the chief actor in events such as the rock he struck with his staff, which became a flowing spring of water. These are a little difficult to consider as real events, but if one believes in them, they are real to him or her. We'll get more traction on this when we consider the most important event in the Old Testament, the Exodus itself. The book says that the Hebrew nation escaped from slavery in Egypt, and after 40 years near the land of Canaan, modern Israel more or less, entered the promised land. Now, according to the Bible, and there are these are mentioned in 2 or 3 books, there were approximately 600,000 men of fighting age in the group. If you use that starting number, that would mean there's a total population, including women, children, and senior citizens, of over 2 million people. Now, how does that fit with what we would consider as reality? If they were marching 10 abreast, the line, not including the animals that they had, would be 150 miles long. Well, can the Exodus be verified through archaeology? Can it be verified through history? Or can it be verified through demographic and geographic data? Well, what archaeological or historical verification exists for the Exodus? The answer is 0. None. Not an iota. Well, you could argue that archaeological evidence would have disappeared by now. And that's simply not the case. Evidence of large groups of people remains for far longer time periods, and that's even true when the people in question left virtually nothing in the way of pottery sherds or other artifacts. You need only to think of Sumeria, Mohenjo-Daro, and the Clovis sites in North America. Again, personal experience. When I was digging at a Huron Indian village in Ontario, dating from about 1500 CE, we were able to determine the number of lodges in the village, the number of people per lodge, and the duration of time they stayed in the village, simply from clues as basic as the color of the earth where post holes had been inserted, the remains of fire pits, the bones around the pits and the middens. So I would have to say that it's virtually impossible for the Israelites, numbering about 2 million people, to have spent 40 years in an area about the size of the state of Connecticut, with about 30 of those years spent in one place, Kadesh Barnea, and not leave any trace of their presence. There's also a major problem on the date of the Exodus. According to biblical chronology, it happened either in the 15th century or in another part of the Bible in the 16th century BCE. Both dates seem hardly possible, since the Bible clearly states that the Israelites ran into Edomites, Moabites, and Amorites, people who did not exist until 1300 roughly BCE. And they avoided the coastal route because of the Philistines, people who did not arrive until around 1200 BCE. Another evidence of the lack of identity is the use of camels at the time. The widespread domestication of the camel as a herd animal did not take place before the 2nd century BCE. The biblical story states that the Israelites numbered, well, we will cover that. The 2 million people who walked out, somebody at that time, as far as history goes, somebody would have mentioned it. The total population of Egypt at the time was 3 million to 3.5 million. If 2 million people left, there would have been a lot of empty homes, the real estate market would have tumbled, Chinese restaurants would have gone out of business. So even though the Egyptians were notorious for ignoring or glossing over defeats of that sort, they would more than likely have said something like, get their spin doctors out, our glorious and ever-conquering Pharaoh drove out a rebellious people in their hundreds of thousands and cast them into the wilderness. No mention of that. What about the neighbors of Canaan? Since there was only a population of less than 40,000 at the time, surely somebody would have noticed more than 2 million people wandering around their neighborhood for 40 years. They were also on the borders of Assyria, Babylonia, and the Hittites, who were excellent record keepers and historians, yet no mention of this huge migration has ever been found. So archaeologically, historically, demographically, zero evidence. So why is there such a gap between the Bible stories and the actual evidence? What were the biblical authors or editors trying to do? Did they indeed have a hidden agenda? Did they have, so to speak, a motive for their mythology? Well, let's look at King Josiah, who became ruler of the southern state of Judah in 639 BCE. For centuries, Judah had been a small kingdom without any influence economically or politically. Despite its prominence in the Bible, until the 700s, it was a small, sparsely inhabited highland area surrounded by arid steppes to the east, west, and south. It was simply of no particular importance. Although Solomonic literature is extolled in the Bible, there was absolutely no trace of any Judahite literary activity from his times. In fact, and this is a whole other subject that could take another hour, most of the Psalms and a lot of the stories in the Bible are very much similar to earlier stories and Psalms written in a Canaanite dialect from the city of Ugari on the river Orontes just north of Israel, a city that was destroyed during the Great Catastrophe around 1200 BCE. There are no monumental inscriptions and personal seals dating from the Solomonic times. They don't appear in Judah until the late 700s. Israel, the northern kingdom of the divided kingdom, on the other hand, was larger, well-populated, much more fertile, and an important state mentioned by the Egyptians, Hittites, and others. It had broad valleys, natural trade routes, access to neighboring cultures, and a warmer, wetter climate. So it was a fairly typical Middle Eastern, middle-sized Semitic kingdom. The Assyrian conquest in the 720s changed all that. During the 18th year of Josiah's reign, while the Jerusalem temple was being renovated, a surprising discovery was made. Lo and behold, in some corner of the temple, the priests found what was purported to be an original edition of the books of the law, or the book of Deuteronomy. Well, what a fortunate discovery. It was just the spark Josiah needed to confirm his reforms. Because of the influx of the refugees from the northern kingdom, Israel, the priests of the temple in Jerusalem, the capital of Judea, were concerned that they would bring their form of the Hebrew religion to Judea, and that the priests of the temple of Salem in Israel would become more important than the local priests. So they found this book, Deuteronomy, which claimed that God could only be worshipped in one place, in the temple of Jerusalem, the temple of Solomon. They also found a range of laws dealing with social welfare, justice, and morality that were just what Josiah and the temple priests had been propagating. The biblical description of Josiah's reforms is not a simple record. It is, in fact, a carefully crafted story embodying old oral folk tales, borrowed mythology, some from Ugari, and triumph over faith in Yahweh, or El. Joshua is implicitly compared to Moses as a lawgiver. He is modeled after Joshua and David, the great conquerors, and he follows the example of Solomon, the patron of the Jerusalem temple. One could easily imagine that the suddenly and fortuitously discovered book was maybe not so very old. In fact, the ink may still have been wet. In his supposedly original book, there was a prophecy that a so-called man of God, just after the breakup of the United Kingdom around 900 BCE, that says, "Thus says the Lord, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name." And goes on to say how he will reform the corruption of his times and return Israel to its old faith, redeem its sins, institute strict observance of the true laws of Yahweh, or El, and make the legendary, glittering United Kingdom of David a reality. But just how real was this prosperous imperial United Kingdom? extensive archaeological excavations from the 1970s on in Jerusalem and other major Israelite cities shows that David and Solomon, in real terms, were nothing more than hill country chieftains in a country with a population of less than 15,000 people, about the size of Hokotepec. Their resplendent capital city, Jerusalem, had a population at most of 5,000, and not one trace of magnificent temples or palaces has ever been found. We have not even found simple pottery sherds dating from the Davidic period in Jerusalem. So, to kind of wrap things up, what is Exodus and the realms of David and Solomon reality? Is the claim that the Hebrews were monotheistic from the time of Abraham, which, according to the Bible, dates back to about 1800 BCE. Is that claim realistic? Again, from personal experience, I was on a dig in Megiddo, in the Jezreel Valley. And Megiddo was the site of more battles than any one place in the world. It's at a key junction of the route from the sea. It is, in fact, the site of the final battle, Armageddon. As mentioned in the book of Revelations, it says the final battle between good and evil will take place in a hill called by the Hebrews Har-Megiddo, which has then become Har-Megiddo, worked into Armageddon. But when we were digging there, and we were digging in the time period of about 1900 BCE, we found many small votive idols so big. And quite a few of them were of a female goddess called Asherah. And again, in the old versions, in the Ugaritic versions, Yahweh had a consort called Asherah, a female goddess. There are also other small votive godlike statues of household deities. So it's highly unlikely that the total conversion to monotheism of the Hebrews did not take place until around 600 BCE under the king Josiah. Well, drawing hard and fast conclusions as to what is myth and what is religious belief and what is real, I think is really kind of a futile task. What I tried to do today is show that there are no hard and fast definitions of these matters, not even from Webster or the Oxford English Dictionary. One person's myth is another person's religious belief, and vice versa. What is reality may or may not be accepted depending on one's faith. But remember, old men with beards are wiser and more powerful than everyone else. So take heart in what I said. Thank you very much. Right.
If you have a question, raise your hand. Someone will bring you the mic.
Thank you for speaking today. I understand that the first 15 books of the Bible were written by Moses, pretty much. Can you tell me what year that might have happened? What years?
Well, first you have to believe that they were written by Moses. Secondly, you have to believe, or you have to figure out whether he was writing fiction or nonfiction. When he wrote it is kind of a moot question, because we don't know whether there really was a Moses. We don't know what he did. And, according to the Bible, the Exodus took place either around 1600 BCE or 1400 BCE, and either date is incorrect. I mean, it couldn't have been either of those. So I think that the laws that Moses wrote were actually written by the priests of the Temple of Jerusalem and attributed to Moses. David? Hello.
Oh, yes, I appreciate your delving into the myth of myth, or the definition of reality. And listening to you, what I comfortably come up with is that there is no defining definition of myth, religion, reality, and that the closest thing to it for me at this time would be to identify it, I think, from what Joseph Campbell said, is that myth is poetry. And then looking at poetry, that poetry defines reality without defining it. And that it poetry allows for reality. So, to me it gives me that space to move and appreciate all of it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Here we go again with this mic. I'm reading a book called God Delusion, wherein he posits that proving that God exists is a scientific question. I'm curious if you might have a response to that.
I don't think it's a scientific question at all. I think it's a question of belief. Can you prove that Zeus existed? Not really. Can you prove that the god Yahweh or the god El existed? There's no evidence, so you can't scientifically prove it. But if you have, let me give you an example. The story of the founding of the city of Thebes is that Cadmus fought a dragon on the site before Thebes was founded. He killed the dragon, and I forget which god it was, Poseidon possibly, said to him, after you kill the dragon, put the seeds in the ground, and the next day a group of warriors will spring up. And they did, and they founded the city of Thebes. Well, that's obviously not reality, but not to the people who lived in Thebes. They believed firmly that their city was founded by Cadmus having slayed the dragon on that site. So it's really what you believe. And there are people who you can talk to them till you're blue in the face, produce evidence one way or the other. You won't sway them at all because they have a firm belief in whatever it is they believe in.
I can see you believe in statistics, or you threw a lot of numbers in there, like millions of people and thousands of years. And for archaeologists, those are very inaccurate figures. I study mathematics and I also work in archaeology, and in archaeology there's a big margin of error, especially in statistics. So it's a question of belief. You believe those numbers that you've been telling us?
Yeah, well, today, of course, dating is much more accurate than it was when I was in the field. But even then, field work, we have radiocarbon dating, which is good for about 50 years, one way or the other. That's good enough when you're talking about something 2,000 years ago. Today, with thermoluminescence and other dendrochronology, etc., you can get much more accurate dating. In our day, we relied on radiocarbon and pottery sherds. Sorry, Ken? Oh, well,
The millions of people that you were talking.
The numbers,
Where the bones?
they come from the Bible. So if you believe in the Exodus, you believe that it was written that 600,000 men.
Yeah, but you said there were millions of people.
Oh, yeah.
Extrapolated to millions of people.
That's right.
Where are the bones?
Oh, there are no bones. That's what I'm saying. There's no evidence that there were that many people involved at the time.
Who said there were millions of people? It's not in the Bible. You extrapolate.
No. It is in the Bible that there were 600,000
600,000
men of fighting age.
Yeah,
So there must have been women, there must have been children, There must have been old men.
Assumptions that you believe.
Yeah, would you address logic and belief?
I'm not sure that's a logical question.
Enjoyed your presentation very much. I just wondered, you didn't touch at all on Christianity. You kind of stopped at Judaism. Would you comment at all on that, or?
I really can't, because my archaeological and historical experience ends at about 500 BCE. As my wife says, most of my best friends have been dead for 3,000 years.
Don't shoot me. There's a video Zygest, been there for a long time, and it's got 4 parts. And one part is the history of religion, and the story of Jesus Christ, and that whole thing goes back to about 1600 to 1800 BC, and that it's all astronomical things. The other is in Toronto, a very well-known minister for years. He wrote the book, The Pagan Christ, and he went into great detail historically that Jesus Christ never existed as such. I'm not taking positions, I'm just telling you, it's factual. He goes, and that Jesus Christ was never ever mentioned in any of the news or anything in the period of his life. But the story of Jesus Christ goes back to 1600 or 1800 BC in all religions, same names and same everything, and it's basically astronomical. Believe or not believe, I'm going to sit down before I get shot.
Thank you. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. I've just been fascinated by it. But can you speak to any of the folklore or parables of earlier civilizations such as Hinduism and how they parallel some of the parables and stories in the Bible, even though they were written way before the Bible?
Yeah, that goes along with what Ross was saying. The video called Zeitgeist, there's maybe an hour in there comparing the beginnings and similarities in different civilizations. If you are interested, if people are really interested, I'll make a DVD of it if you tell me, and I'll give it to you next week.
I confess I know very little about Eastern religions. I've spent whatever time I had, and I haven't had enough of that studying Western civilization.
Hello. Can the Temple of Solomon be dated? Can the date of the building of the Temple of Solomon be dated? And is it true that it was built, or they hired the Phoenicians to build it?
Well, that's what the Bible says, that they were unable to build anything of that magnitude, that their knowledge of architecture was very limited, and that's confirmed by anything you find at the site, that there are no other palatial buildings. By palatial, I mean palace-type buildings or temple-type buildings. And that most of the temples that we find in Megiddo, dating to that time period, it's the period of the United Kingdom, were made out of mud brick, which doesn't last very long, but does leave traces behind. And as far as the Temple of Solomon, there are certainly there's nothing left of that. The only temple remnants that are still in Jerusalem are from the Temple of Herod, which dates from about, 1 CE or 1 BCE, around the time of the turn of the calendar.
Hi, my name is Leela, and in his book Ishmael, Daniel Quinn writes that the definition of mythology is the story of how things got to be the way they are. And that if you were to ask many of us in this room, we would probably answer that there is no mythology for our civilization. That's old stuff. That's Greeks, that's Romans, that's Norse people. They had mythology. We don't have mythology. Mythology is a story that's not true. But we do have a mythology, and it starts with, many people believe, the Big Bang. On. 10,000 years ago, we became agriculturalists. La, 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 la. Here we are, man appeared, and we are the way we are. And this is our mythology. This is the story of how things got to be the way they are. Only, according to Daniel Quinn, we think that the story stops when man came on the scene and introduced agriculture, and then came on to be the technological civilization and culture that we have today. Food for thought.
What do you mean by stop?
Well, because he says, what did you mean by stopped? Quinn says that we believe that man was the ultimate presence, if you will, yes, and that, you know, this is the way it's going to be from here on out. That man is going to be the ruler and the keeper of the animals and all of the things that you read about in the Bible. And now, of course, we're possibly destroying all that we have created. And so, is man going to be able to fix all of that, or are we going to become extinct and something else going to happen? But our mythology says that man was the end of the story.
Thank you very much for your talk. I certainly enjoyed it. I have a question on the Bible. Whether you believe it's myth, reality, or religion, have you an opinion why the Bible has lasted 2,000 years?
I don't. It's hard to say. The Bible is part of a firm religious credo. And people who believe in the religion, therefore, believe in the Bible. As far as its veracity goes, the further away in time it goes, the less reliable it is. The closer in time it goes, the more reliable it is. The stories in the Bible dealing with the last kings of the Judahite kingdom, kings like Ahab, Omrod, etc., have some truth to them. They're propagandized, like Ahab is described as a terrible person. His wife Jezebel is described as an even worse person. But we know from archaeology that during the reign of Ahab, there was a population, not explosion, the population grew, the kingdom became richer, they were able to afford better buildings, etc., etc. But as the Bible gets closer and closer in time, it becomes more and more reliable. Further away, it becomes unreliable.
You want to speak to Constantine's role in Christianity?
Well, Constantine supposedly was the first Christian emperor of Rome. He shared the empire with Maxentius, then defeated Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge on the Tiber, became the sole emperor of Rome, but split it into the eastern and the western kingdom with an emperor in Rome and an emperor in Byzantium, which then became Constantinople. According to, I would say, mythology, he became Christian at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge when he saw a sign in the sky of a cross and words written in the sky, in hoc signo vinces. By this sign you shall conquer. His mother-in-law, Helen, was a devoted Christian, And she actually went to the Holy Land and discovered a lot of places associated with Christ. She discovered pieces of the true cross. She discovered actually enough pieces of the true cross to build 3 or 4 churches. So we think that Constantine may or may not actually have been a Christian, but his mother-in-law and his wife certainly were. And the empire, at that point, the official religion became Christianity rather than paganism, although there was a fallback 2 or 3 emperors later.
They're very small churches.
Yeah, right.
What did he say? What did
He
he
said
say?
they must have been very small churches.
Yes. I think, being human, that I look for a comfortable meaning to me that I'm comfortable with. That's, I'll say, all-inclusive. That includes everything. And right now, at this point, I'm comfortable with saying that I do not believe anything which allows me to believe anything.
Thank you.
Good attitude.
I think that will wrap it up for today. Thank you, Bob. Come back next week and learn about the new adoption scene. Please dispose properly of your coffee cups, stack the chairs, turn on your cell phones, and I can't think of anything else. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.